Welcome to Lunch with the Lord. I'm Pastor Mark, and we're in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 1. We're going to be looking at verse 7 this lesson. But before we begin, Jeremiah 15:16, Thy words were found, and I did eat them, and thy word was unto me the joy and the rejoicing of my heart. Now, in verse 6, actually, is the context of where we begin verse 7. It says, And John was clothed with camel's hair, and with a girdle of a skin about his loins, and he did eat locusts and wild honey. And we said last lesson that John was dressed very humbly, and John ate very humbly. He was a son of a priest, but he was fulfilling the office of a prophet. And now he's out at the Jordan River baptizing people. And he says here in verse 7, And he preached, saying, There comes one mightier than I after me, the latchet of whose shoes that I am not worthy to stoop down and unloose. And when he says here, there comes one, there should be a definite article before the word one. So what John is saying here is that there comes the one. And it's not just, he's not talking about just anybody, but he's talking about someone unique, someone that is distinctive from everyone else. And then he says, the latchet of whose shoes I am not worthy to stoop down and to unloose. And, it was the custom that the slave of the house would remove the sandals of guests and wash their feet as they entered the home. John said this so that the people coming to be baptized would not form a wrong impression of who he was. And though Jesus himself said that there has not been born among women a greater than John the Baptist in Matthew chapter 11, verse 11, yet John said in John chapter 3, verse 30, not the same John chapter 3, verse 30, that he must increase and I must decrease. So John the Baptist is saying, I'm not worthy, this one who's coming, I'm not worthy to unloose his shoes, to untie his shoes, and to wash his feet. So I don't want you to get the wrong impression of who I am. I'm not the Messiah. I'm the forerunner, but I'm not worthy. The one who's coming, I'm not worthy to even unloose his shoes and wash his feet for him. It would have been easy for John the Baptist's flesh, to be proud in God's calling for his life. And this is a very big temptation for Christians, to be proud in the calling that God has given to them. And yet we see John as being very humble here. John knew who he was, and he knew his ministry, and he knew his calling from God. And he knew that he was just the forerunner. He was not the person. But John said, there's coming one he is the one that you're looking for. And I'm not worthy to unloose his shoes and to wash his feet. But many Christians consume the call of God upon their own desires, and they welcome the praise and the glory from people that is reserved only for God. Gifted preachers, song leaders, administrators, at first the calling of God, they are humble. But little by little, they let the flesh creep in, and it infects their heart, and they get proud and controlling. It's no longer he must increase, but I must increase. How do I stay on top? How do I make myself better to stay in the spotlight? Some preachers and singers that you can just tell when they're preaching or when they're singing. You can just tell it's all about them and their abilities. Their hearts betray the message that they speak and the words that they speak of the very song that they sing or of the message that they're giving. So sometimes you can listen on the radio to a song or a preacher, and in your spirit you can just tell this is all about them. It's not about God. It's not about God's glory. It's all about who they are, how well they can sing, and how well they can hit these notes, right? Or how well they can preach. And this is it affects Christians too, where John the Baptist said he must increase. John said, he must increase, I must decrease, the Gospel of John. And John the Baptist said, I'm not worthy to unloose his shoes. The guy who's coming, I'm not worthy to unloose his shoes and to wash his feet. But yet there's many Christians today in positions in the church who they want the praise, they want the glory. They want it to be all about them and who they are, and not about God. And sometimes you can feel in your spirit when you're hearing someone preach or do a Bible study, you can tell that it's about them. It's about who they are. And it's about them receiving glory for what God has called them to do. Our hearts are deceitful and desperately wicked and want nothing more than to receive all the glory that belongs to God. Always guard your heart and check yourself if you feel yourself desirous of wanting to receive some of the glory. Check your heart, and if you want to receive, if there's a desire in your heart to want to receive some of that glory, that's the flesh. That's your sinful nature propping up its head, wanting to receive the pat on the back instead of God receiving the glory. So he says now in verse 8, I indeed have baptized you with water, but he shall baptize you with the Holy Spirit, right? He will baptize you with the Holy Spirit. And so he says here, the baptism of the Holy Spirit was spoken of even by Jesus himself. In Luke chapter 24, verse 49, John chapter 15, verse 26, chapter 16, verses 13 and 14, and Acts chapter 1 and verse 8. And the Holy Spirit's baptism was fulfilled in Acts chapter 2 and verse 1. It was spoken of in the Old Testament, in Joel chapter 2, verse 28, and in Ezekiel chapter 36, verses 25 through 27. The baptism of the Messiah would be on an internal baptism. It would be an internal baptism, not an external baptism. John the Baptist's baptism was an external baptism. But the baptism of the Holy Spirit is going to be an internal baptism. The Messiah only could give us the Holy Spirit to live within us. The baptism of the Holy Spirit would not only identify who the Messiah was, but also who by faith would belong to him, to the Messiah, who would receive him by faith. So the baptism of the Holy Spirit was spoken of in the Old Testament. And it's also a sign, the baptism of the Holy Spirit is a sign of who this Messiah is, and also who would believe upon Jesus Christ, who would be part of the family of God, those that are baptized into the family of God. So the baptism of the Holy Spirit, right? Verse 7, he preached that one is mightier than he is coming. He's not worthy to unlatch his shoes and wash his feet. And John says, he says, I baptize you with water. That's nice. That's my calling from God. But the one who's coming, who's mightier than I, is going to baptize you with the Holy Spirit. It's a whole different baptism. All right? Until next lesson, walk with the Lord. I know he walks with you.